For some mysterious reason, since the dawn of human history, we have been telling stories to one another. Like us, these stories started simple, then evolved and advanced, akin to our physical maps of the world. But our mapping of the physical world has an obvious and practical purpose linked to our survival. So why then do we tell stories? It's been estimated that there are over 500,000 feature-length theatrical films in existence, with the number of books in the world weighing in at 129,864,880. These staggering numbers stand as a testament and representation of the collective amount of human time, days, years, and even lives sacrificed in order to achieve them. In our modern era, we rightly and yet erroneously compartmentalize this sort of storytelling under the non-threatening name, quote-unquote, entertainment. And yet, why would we sacrifice the immense amount of human life that we do at the altar of entertainment? If telling stories in this manner takes so much time, effort, and resources to do, why do we as humans do it? Why does mankind spend so much of its time telling stories? To answer this question, it seems important to first answer what a story is. The best distillation that I can come up with to describe the building blocks or DNA of a story is: a story is any number of facts or things linked together by causal relationships that are recounted in a sequence that is aimed at a goal. There has to be data. That data has to be causally linked together. The linked data has to be told, meaning the process must be experienced in the realm of time. And ultimately, that telling of linked data must orient itself around or towards the story's central purpose, theme, or goal. Even if the theme seems like an emergent trait arising from a story being intuitively uttered by someone unaware of its why, perhaps drawn to tell this story by some subconscious urge or attraction they are attempting to process in the very telling of the story is nonetheless ultimately bracketed as a gestalt or a whole according to some core thematic DNA that the events and characters share or are laboring towards or away from. Stories as devices unfold through the medium of time. They are not static things. They are and must be by their nature processes that require the movement of their constituent parts through the realm of time. That said, a story is not simply the recounting or listing of random events over time. A story as a technology functions as a selection or bracket around a specific set of events in a specific order as opposed to all events in any order. Both this act of selecting events and ordering those specific events requires some ordering principle. What do these events causally have to do with one another? In my estimation, what differentiates a story from just a list of facts is the causal relationship of those facts and the aim or through line that makes these causal relationships intelligible. This aim or through line is what we refer to as the story's point. The idea of a point is a spatial or navigational one used to organize and understand the relationship of geographic elements or locations. Similarly, the point of a story is used by both writer and audience to order and organize the constituent elements of said story. The point, goal, or theme is how we recognize the causal relationships within a bracketed structure, even if we're only subconsciously aware of it. It is how a story is intelligible as a cohesive entity, and how we can comprehend the flow of ideas or events as cogent as opposed to non sequitur. For example, if I say Frodo Baggins is taking the One Ring to Mordor, that is not a story, it's simply news. If I say Frodo Baggins is taking the One Ring to Mordor and Luke Skywalker is a Jedi, that is still not a story, it's just stating more facts. Further, if I say Frodo Baggins is taking the One Ring to Mordor because Luke Skywalker is a Jedi, though this in word provides a causal relationship, we are still unsatisfied because we don't understand what Luke's identity has to do with Frodo's decisions. Put another way, we are lost. This ideological version of being lost is also relatable when you're listening to someone talk in the manner we colloquially refer to as word salad. They string together a great cacophony of words in many shapes and sizes, but you struggle to find the point. Why are they saying this to you? This quote-unquote why helps you to organize the seemingly unrelated words into something comprehensible. If I said, Frodo must take the One Ring to Mordor because, and then explained the history of Middle-earth, the One Ring, and its link to the potential destruction of Middle-earth, etc., the story becomes more and more real and clear, with each buttressing why and explanation. Further, if one were to understand Tolkien's intention and moral paradigm, seemingly unrelated elements in the Lord of the Rings books would begin to stand out as relevant and intelligible. All thanks to the guiding light of Tolkien's goal. The awareness of these causal links in stories requires a developed brain with a memory large enough to hold multiple strings of events. The past, where the characters in a story started, the present, where the story is, and the future, where the goals of the characters are directing the story's motion. The miracle of our brain being able to juggle its multiple awarenesses of these temporal locations are how we feel or judge a story's pacing. We can feel when a story is rushing or when it is dragging, as if we are rating the human construction of a specific story against some temporal law of physics, much like how we feel the uncanny valley of bad CGI or AI attempting to replicate human speech. Something feels off. But what standard are we using to rate a story's shortcomings? Our brain's interaction with a story is quite akin to our perception of music. To understand and perceive rhythm as rhythm, or the unfolding of a melody as a melody, and not simply just sounds, we must consciously juggle our awareness of the past, present, and future, and it is in this delightful tension between the relationships of these three things that the transcendent bliss of music occurs. The greater our awareness of the interconnectedness of these constituent elements, the greater the map of reality the work of story or art can reveal. Even the individual words of these sentences are organized by and around central ideas. If at any time I were to pause on a single word, the sentence would give up the ghost and die. It is in fact the movement or flow of these words in the realm of time that manifests the quote-unquote spirit or idea and organizes the individual words as a comprehensible whole. There is a thread that strings our letters together into what we call a word. This word is a body made up of unrelated pieces, letters, and is given wholeness or life because it points beyond the letters to a definition and a set of associations. There is also a thread in sentences, the spirit of intent, that strings the seemingly separated words together to accomplish its goal. In fact, we often rate the necessity or superfluousness of each word based on how well it accomplishes this goal. My intuition is that if you follow that process far enough, there is a thread in our very lives, and in fact the whole of human history, stringing all the seemingly disjointed sentences, words, and letters together into a massive tome. But what is the story it's telling? Beginning at the dawn of human consciousness, as our memories grew, so did our perception of patterns. We started realizing the elements of a day repeated, then a month within its lunar cycle, then the seasons within a year, then with the help of oral and eventually written traditions, we realized there were even larger patterns. This evolution of awareness is reflected in the development of our storytelling, as it is my belief that storytelling is the means by which we connect our individual ability to map reality with other individuals, and most importantly, other individuals across expanses of time far larger than our own lifespans. A way to imagine my theory about this is, think of one human brain as a CPU with the processing power of a single terabyte. It has a limit on what it can process in a moment. Though as a workaround to this limitation, it can store information for later recall. This can increase the processing power of an individual exponentially. Further, one can increase their processing power even more by linking up with other CPUs, sharing each individual's processor, and collectively storing more information for later recall. Now imagine that even still, this network of connected CPUs could increase its processing power by linking up with later generations. This increase within humanity's collective ability to process and comprehend reality may be so far beyond an individual's processing power that the information on the individual level might seem incomprehensible, dreamlike, or like madness. And yet, we have been doing this for thousands of years in the form of our stories, myths, and religious texts. The earliest megalithic structures we have seem to be obsessed with charting the stars, plotting their courses, and understanding the rhythms and patterns of the natural world as it flows through time. At the time, constructing such objects would have been a considerable sacrifice of time, effort, and often life. What was so important about what these structures represent and reach for that humanity thought it worth the sacrifice? When you're a child, you often expend large swaths of time play-acting as a character, or building monuments out of blocks, or constructing huge pillow forts that would, from the outside, seem like a huge use of energy, planning, and sacrifice. But as a child, you largely have no plan. You're utilizing the action itself as a way to work something out or manifest a thought process. You're building your megalith as a way to practice an idea physically and learn how to think it. It seems the same to me with humanity at large in its own childlike state. We started with impossibly large rocks, arranged in specific ways so as to chart the flow of time and tell the story of protagonists like the sun or the moon, or specific stars like Sirius, etc., and their motion through the year. It's as if we were attempting to link what appeared as everlasting to us, stones, with the fluctuation of the world over massive swaths of time, and that only these stones could endure to be observed by later generations. It could be said, then, that these stones were laying the foundations of our map of time and of its archetypes. Our stories advanced from solar and lunar allegorical tales to mythical epics of gods and goddesses, which arguably act as prototypes for psychological archetypes. These gods, that at first battled within the human mind, soon went to war in the bodies of human empires and their religious institutions. In this evolutionary process, religious texts detailing the stories of these gods were drafted, circulated, and critiqued, and a sort of hierarchical set of principles or physics of the gods emerged. This is reflected in the Greek gods, for example, with Poseidon being lord of the ocean and its deities, with entities like Triton or Proteus subject to him, with water nymphs generally representing lakes, rivers, and lesser bodies of water beneath Triton and Proteus. This process of natural selection would lead to the supremacy of singular gods. Within the Hebrew tradition, a single god was sovereign and utilized lowercase g gods or angels as his messengers. These angels reflected their earlier forms as proto-psychological archetypes, or gods, by embodying specific virtues, or as it is with the fallen angels, vices, and are shown as organizing hierarchically, i.e., archangels above lesser angels within their specific rank of virtue. Much like it is in other pantheons, like those belonging to the Greeks, Sumerians, Egyptians, etc., the angels of the Hebrews and later Christians are in charge of elements, regions of land, rivers, oceans, etc. Even the Hebrew cherubim, who we know as the Cupid-like winged infant of modern depictions, was a far more terrifying form, akin to that of the Egyptian Sphinx, and was a representation of large portions of time. In fact, the animal parts that compose the cherubim are symbolic representations of the cardinal points of the zodiac, an ancient measuring device for time. Cherubim were considered higher up in the ranking of angels, with angels of elements below them, and angels in charge of specific regions below them, etc. I explain all of that to both illustrate the connection of historical deities to what we would call physical laws or physical phenomena, and to hint at how humanity has historically seemed to assume these laws hierarchically organize. After all, it is a fair assumption for us humans to make, for in our own lives, laws are generally written and enforced. Once more, I will cover this at great depth in later chapters, but the main point I am trying to convey here is, to the ancient mind, the organization of reality was not unlike our modern school of physics, though personified and stored in narrative. That is to say, there is an assumed perceivable hierarchy in which physics organizes phenomena within that the ancient understanding of deity seems to foreshadow, a physics of the gods, if you will. This physics of the gods would even be represented within our modern understanding of psychology, as we arrange an individual's psychological conditions within personality types, i.e. narcissism, and then those personality types within clusters, etc. Even many of the words used in psychology, like narcissism, come from Greek mythology. In fact, the name psychology itself comes from the Greek deity Psyche, the goddess of the soul. As our dreams produced folk tales, and our folk tales produced myths, and our myths produced religions, our stories progressed through the evolutionary process. Our heroes looked more and more like some archetypal form, as if our stories were sand morphing around some utterly real or utterly true thing. Eventually, these stories would reach an eerie, terrible, and by all accounts impossible climax. The bizarre culmination of human storytelling took form in the 1st century in the ultimate meta-hero myth found in the 4 Gospels of the New Testament. The subject of the tale within these mysterious books was so ominous, so archetypal, and so utterly true that it traumatized humanity so profoundly that the Western world even centers their time around its point of origin. It's as if within our collective mental map of space-time, we discovered an impossible center, or a compass rose by which all heroes, all gods, and potentially all reality understands its location. Like a single, mysterious point on the map of time, in which all events derive their origin. Like the moment in which one realizes they are in love, or some horrific car crash. For the rest of one's life, this point stands as a beacon or an epoch. It seems to me that the only explanation for how deeply this event seems to have traumatized our collective consciousness is that we, in fact, if even only on the narrative level, interacted with something from that realm of the archetypes that was so quintessential and so ideal that it could rightly be called humanity's other, and paradoxically, humanity's ideal. After our meta-story or meta-map reached its pinnacle, being as sophisticated and comprehensive as the world itself, we decrescendoed away from mapping to crescendo in our tools of analysis of said maps, to make maps of the map. This process of making maps of the map, or of making map legends for the maps of the map, is exemplified in the canonization and compilation of religious texts like, for example, the Torah of the Jews or the Holy Bible of the Christians. Whether by intuition, rationale, or some other guiding force, its various scriptures, though themselves each written by individuals often separated by thousands of years, were perceived as pieces of some larger whole. They were subject to scrutiny, and some of these scriptures were canonized by a council of religious leaders who chose them according to, among other things, their connective merit. Put another way, for better or worse, the canonized scriptures were chosen according to their relevance to one another as a cohesive narrative. These relevant parts were then compiled into singular tomes, which, in the case of the examples I mentioned before, were known as the Torah or the Bible. In subsequent generations, tomes like these would be pored over by scholars, studied, analyzed, and eventually birth entire schools of thought like theology, philosophy, and even alchemy, which itself blossomed science and eventually psychology, to endeavor in the comprehension of what these tomes contain, and possibly most important, what they mean. This pursuit strewn the literal pages of these tomes with the various commentaries of each school, and curiously, it was not long until the commentary of the text would be studied just as much, if not more, as the text itself. And it is here at this point in history, at this stage of the mapping process, that we find ourselves, adrift in the post-apocalyptic waters of our age in perpetual denouement, collecting whatever notes about the notes we can find amidst the sodden wreckage of our present tense. It is here in these chaotic waters of our present age that I find myself, and it is here, as a fellow sojourner, that my words and my attempt at patching together the pieces I have collected find their way to you.